And I want to put out a huge thanks to all the members who have helped. I would name names, but then I would be forgetting names and it would make me feel really bad. But you know who you are and you know the kind of time and effort that you all have put into this. And it couldn't have happened without you. So thank everybody that's put a hand in getting us moved and getting the shop up and going and clean. We will be having a shop cleanup. Everybody's probably heard the buzz. We're going to be participating in the First Fridays event. You're going to hear First Fridays about 10 times through my announcements. But our first shop cleanup for this year is going in at this location is going to be on March 30th, which will be the Saturday prior to the First Friday. It'll start at 10 a.m., run till around 12 or noon. It usually gets done by 12, but if it needs to take a little longer, we're basically wanting to get the shop looking good because we're going to probably be touring people through there during First Fridays to kind of show them what we've got. And we want it to present well. Remember, if you haven't already, there is a tin box on the shelf right there at the entry that has the membership cards for 2024. So if you're a 2024 paid member and you haven't gotten your card, pick it up. You can use it at a few locations for some discounts for the Woodturners Club. They're there in a metal card file box.
I know members who joined this year and weren't members last year, their new membership card should be attached to their
name tag. Okay. So
whatever.
So if you're a brand new member, then your card's probably attached to your name tag and it'll be up on the board. If you're an older member or a renewing member, then and you haven't gotten your card, look for it in that little tin box. We have emptied out many of the totes that were loaned to us or donated to us for that move. I just wanted to this month, I want anybody that had loaned some or wants some back. If you brought them in and you want them back, they're back there and ready for you. Probably next month, I'll announce anybody that wants a tote that we've got several of them back there, but they're up on the racks pretty high because they're lightweight right now. And if anybody needs any help getting any down, let me know. I'll help you get them down. Let's see. Phill Sikes has created an Instagram account. We've been talking about it for several months now, but he's still looking for photos and content. So if you've got a project that you're proud of, give a little bit of description and send him a few photos. He'll get it up on some of our social media that's out there. Be helpful. I think, you know, our big push this year should be for exposure to the community. We're in what is known as the Crossroads District now, and I think we need to embrace that and get to know as many of the people in the Crossroads District as possible and make them members. Let's see. There's a tub back there on the table by Kevin that has we're gathering up the $20 bowls for the initial kickoff First Friday's event in April. So we'll have the tote here and we'll also keep it back in the shop together. Either the donated items, if it's a donation, I think there's stickers that you can put on them to identify it as a donation. If it's something that you're looking to sell to potentially get some kickback on, just leave your name, make sure it's marked with your name, identifiable, so that we can know who is getting paid for that. You may also want to note the wood type, especially if it's not real obvious, or if it's a unusual type of bowl, you might know what kind of it is, such as a wing bowl or something like that. Do know that 20% of the sales will go to the Woodworkers Guild, and everybody's like, why are we giving money to the guild? Well, the guild is paying all the event fees, any advertising that's done. It is all through the guild. So the 20% is a kickback to get them paid back our portion for the advertisement, and the guild is going to have a table actually in the artist area in the Crossroads District, trying to direct people to come back to the shop where we're going to have tables set up with sellable items. The kickoff First Friday's event is approaching soon, Saturday, April 5th, 5 to 9 p.m. Tables will be inside the club, not outdoors. Paid members can sell personal items during this event. See the email from Kevin Neely for details, or if you need to, just talk to Kevin. If you are selling items, please contact Kevin Neely to coordinate. And I know he's been looking for some photos by possible, right?
Basically, if you're gonna be a vendor and sell stuff that First Friday, my letter said, I need to know who you are, a little bit more than a week before First Friday. And I need to know about how many pieces you have. And, I'd like a photo of one of your best pieces. The reason why we need some information is because, the guild is gonna make price stickers for every piece. This is gonna be some way to keep the people that get reimbursed straight.
Okay.
If you can imagine, that would be all messed up.
Oh, sure.
Price stickers, your name, it's needed a week ahead of time. And we're gonna hand them out on First Friday day, so you can tag your pieces and write your price on it.
Okay. So at minimum, a week before the event, you need to have the information to Kevin if you're planning on making personal sales, which is great. Oh, and Kevin did say if you are having personal sales to have the items at the shop by 3 p.m. the day of the event. So you got plenty of time to set up.
And if you have a lot of different kinds of pieces, the field is probably going to separate them and put them with like pieces. For convenience to buy, not for your convenience. They already made that clear to me. So if you bring squirrel cages and cutting board, they're going to separate. But if you bring all one thing like bowls, they'll likely keep everything around.
In the same area.
Yeah, same area, but they're gonna separate things maybe.
Okay. It'll be a learning event through the first Friday, and we'll kind of gather information from that and move on to the next one. Right. And if you're not planning on helping, you're planning on being here to sell anything, come on down just to check it out. It's a pretty cool event, and you'll get to know kind of the area a little bit better too. Yes. Sure. Right. So we've got plenty of opportunities if you want to show up to help out. We're likely going to be touring community through the shop. We're going to be potentially demonstrating something back there being turned while this is going on. We'll have tables out here that we need to sell items and keep track of that information. So plenty to do. As that approaches, think about if you can help out that day, let us know. Let's see. Oh, another way you can help out the club is by participating in the dollar sweepstakes. That is our dollar sweepstakes item. Am I doing that, Rob?
You did that right.
Okay.
We doing that, Mike?
I forgot, yeah.
We'll get it going. It's over there.
They don't work really good. Big glasses.
Big glasses.
They don't fall very bad at all.
So we'll have an opportunity there as we get into the refreshments. We'll collect some dollar sweepstakes, right? All right. Let's see. In regards to open shop, 9 lays are ready to go, although we're still working out some of the final placements and trying to get things where they need to be. But if you want to turn in the new shop, it can happen. So don't hesitate to show up. We do have some leveling feet that's been ordered for one of the Powermatic lays to help it be more stable. And we still got an issue with the drill press bed raising and lowering, but it is functional with the bed where it is, so it can be used. If you are using the shop, please help keep it clean and organized, especially after we go through the cleaning on Saturday. We've got a couple of open turning nights prior to the first Fridays. We want to make sure we get it good and cleaned up after that. Help wanted, KCWT, help wanted, contact a board member if you can help. First Friday's event, already told you about that. Need members to help sell, promote the club, offer tours of the shop, and demonstrate during the event. So as that time approaches, keep that date in mind. Let Kevin know if you plan to be there to help out. He'll keep a list and we'll make sure that we have enough members to do what we want to do there. We're still in need of additional shop openers and backups. We need backups for Anthony on Wednesday and Thursday evenings. He's pretty reliable to be there those evenings, but I don't know that he has necessarily any phone numbers to call if he knows that he can't be there that night to maybe give him a backup, right? Okay, well, that's one. I'm on the list. You guys got to get on the list too. Let's see. Still need an opener for the second Saturday of each month that was vacated when Sean passed away. That's a long time that's over a year now that we've been without a second Saturday opener. I know David Alexander's filled the bill for a lot of those times, but we need a few more openers. So consider that if you could spare a Saturday morning or Wednesday or Thursday evening of a month, let us know. And as always, our club's always looking for demonstrators or demonstrations. So if you have a project idea to demonstrate or a subject that you would really like to see demonstrated, Mike Thomas, no, he's trying to fill a calendar up for this year. I think that's it for help wanted. Upcoming activities and events. I told you I was going to say it about 10 times. First Fridays is from 5 to 9 from April through October. So we'll have, is that 9 months, Kevin? 8 months, 8 months of First Fridays events. So if you don't make the first one, know that you've got plenty of opportunities to help out later on down the line. I want to, let's let our club embrace our new Crossroad District's home. Let your coworkers, family, and friends know about the First Fridays event. And even if it's just to get them down here to see the shop, it'd be a fun time for them to see and then wander the neighborhood as well. Anthony is going to be offering a basic bowl turning class coming up here in April. It will be 3 4-hour sessions starting on Saturday, April 13th and Sunday, finishing up on Saturday, April 20th. They'll run from 12:30 to 4:30, so it will not impact the open shop times. So I think there were still some spots available. So we got 3 openings remaining. Anthony, I've been through that class. He's a great teacher. You just got to put up with some jokes and a little bit of singing. Let's see. April meeting demonstration is going to be none other than Anthony Harris, and he's great. Okay, so this is 2 combinations that I've never really seen put together, but he's going to do a double demo on chopsticks and ring turning. I suppose you can use the rings for your napkins to put by the chopsticks or something. Fun demonstration. Looking forward to that. That's about it, other than if you are looking for information on the club, the website's probably the best place to find it. KCWoodturners.org. Bookmark it because you'll go back to it a lot. And it's the best resource for club information. We've also got a monthly wood chips newsletter. If you see it come through, take a glance through. It also shows some of the people that support our club, some of the companies and stuff. Finally, you can always ask one of the board members, and if we don't know the answer, we'll see if we can't get an answer for you. So that gets me through our club announcements tonight. The next thing I'll introduce is Phill Sikes is going to come up and initially give you a little bit of a safety prep And then he's going to go right into his demonstration on turning green wood. So without further ado, you know him, you love him. It's Phill Sikes.
Bring that mic to me. Swap me mics. Come here, Chris.
Must be my fault. There we go. All right. Can you guys hear me all right? All right. Thanks for coming out tonight. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Phill Sikes, and I'm one of the members here at Kansas City Woodturners. Tonight, we're going to talk about turning green wood. Now, this is not a Dr. Seuss story. This is about turning, who knows what green wood is, or when I say green wood, who's got an idea what I mean?
Pistachio.
Pistachio wood. Yeah. Is pistachio wood green? Kind of. I actually don't know. I've never seen pistachio wood. But when we talk about green wood, we're talking about wet wood or wood that has been recently cut down. And so it has all the moisture in it that a tree usually carries while it's alive. I put together a handout. So I'm going to hand these around here. You guys might have to share them, but you can take a look through. And I think Kevin also sent out these as well, so you can have a look. It's on the website as well. You can download it from the website as well. I'm going to get to the safety minute in a minute because it'll be part of the demo. I'll show some of the safety involved with turning green wood or making sure you don't hurt yourself turning green wood. Not that you would hurt yourself turning green wood, but working on a lathe is always a little bit of a something you need to be cautious of. You've got a big spinning piece of wood on the lathe. And with wet wood, it's a lot heavier than dry wood. So if something were to happen, you want to be careful and make sure you've taken precautions and make sure that you are out of the line of fire. But why turn green wood? I'm going to try not to talk too much because I know sometimes I can talk a lot. So I'm going to try not to talk too much up front. But I want to talk about a few things, and then we're going to get into turning and hopefully just turn for the rest of the time. And if anyone has questions, everybody does green wood differently or has their own method or whatever it might be. So I'm here to tell you guys about what I personally do with green wood. But if you have questions about something that I'm not getting to or haven't spoken about, please feel free to bring it up. I'd rather talk about what you guys have questions about, or rather than just hear me talk the whole night. But why turn green wood? The big reason for me is because it's free, usually, and I can get it in much larger sizes. And again, it's free, usually. There is some cost involved. You've got to spend the time to go out and find the wood. You can get green wood or recently cut down wood, usually from the side of the road. Since I started turning, now I can hear a chainsaw up to 5 miles away. I can tell if it's a chainsaw, a string trimmer, or a blower, and I can sometimes tell the brand. But my wife thinks it's funny when I'll be like, I'll be back in a minute, and I go outside and I'm listening to see where the chainsaw is in our neighborhood. And a lot of the wood that I turn has been from probably just about a mile or two or from around my house. I don't have to go far to get it. Sometimes I'll go get a tree from somebody or logs from somewhere, but usually it happens enough. I'll be like, man, I could really use some fresh wood. And then the next day I hear a chainsaw somewhere, or I see a tree truck go by, and I know to go follow and see if they're going to be taking anything down. So the big advantage for me is that I can go and I can get large pieces of wood that I couldn't get anywhere else. I can't go to Rockler and buy a blank that's 15 by 6 and put that on the lathe. That would be a very expensive piece of wood. They sell like 6 by 2 or 6 by 3, which is great for small stuff. But if you want to make a large bowl, like Brick brought in those giant black walnut bowls last meeting that were, it was like 18, 20 inches in diameter, 19 by like 8 or so deep. Yeah. Did you buy that wood? No. Did you find it somewhere? Oh, Don gave it to you. There you go. So it's a great way to get wood, or get wood in sizes that you normally wouldn't be able to get, especially if you like to turn larger pieces, or if you like to turn multiples of things. It's nice to be able to have that option there. So the interesting thing about green wood is that it's full of moisture. How many people know that there is water in trees? Yeah, in fact, there's a lot of water. The majority of weight in a tree is generally water. And once that tree is cut, it starts to lose its water, and sometimes pretty rapidly. And that's what's interesting to me about greenwood and working with greenwood is it's kind of a give and take, a process on how you figure out how to work with it. So I stole some charts. If you look at actually the references down here at the bottom on my sheet, the book here that I'm referencing aloud here today is Turning Greenwood by Michael O'Donnell. And if you're interested in greenwood, this is a great book because the first, I don't know, third of the book is all, no, maybe half of the book is all about turning greenwood and the different characteristics of it, how to work with it, and what you can do with it. So it's a really great reference for that. And he has one here that I kind of copied down here. It's the free moisture versus bound moisture versus the equilibrium moisture content, or EMC. So EMC is when wood is totally dry. So for instance, this piece of wood right here is totally dry to the atmospheric moisture that we're currently in. This is your science lesson for today. This piece of wood right here, I cut down this week from my backyard, and it's been sitting in my shop, so it's starting to get dry. But if I pass it around, you can actually feel how wet it is. And this is a piece of apple, came from an apple tree that I cut down earlier in the week. And you can just feel the moisture on it. And that's actually sitting out for about a week or so. That is the where a branch would peter out from the main trunk of the tree right there. So you can see also the lines, if you since it's cut in half, you can see how those branches kind of separate. And that's where you get really cool or interesting kind of feathering or some pressure coloring that you might get on different pieces of wood as well. But anyway, wood is wet. So we have to control how we dry it so that it doesn't crack. I didn't bring a cracked bowl. I should have brought a cracked bowl. But this is a piece of, I think, Radford pear that I would have cut down and roughed out. Usually I write down when I roughed it out, but of course I didn't do that on this. I think it was last summer sometime. And you can see that it's changed shape. It's actually higher in the middle right here than it is on the sides. It's now longer than it is wider. And these are all changes in moisture that have occurred. As the moisture has evaporated out of the wood cells actually shrink, and they shrink in 3 specific directions. And now I have a dry, mostly dry, but warped bowl. And the reason why I've kind of made it kind of thick is so that I can actually put it back on the lathe. I can turn it again, and I can make it perfectly round. And that's how you get a perfectly round bowl from green wood. First, you have to rough turn it into something like this, and then wait a year, 2 years, put it back on the lathe, and return it so you have a nice round bowl. I think this is round. It looks pretty round. If you turn it green to its finished thickness, and then you let it dry carefully, it does some strange things. In this case, it was a calabash shape, so it already was kind of curved in, but it's actually curved in more. The sides have again kind of shrunk around, and it's definitely more of an oval shape. So I'll pass this around. It's been sitting on my shelf because it's got a hole in the bottom. It's not really useful for much. But I really like the shape, and I like how thin that is and how much it changed. And this other bowl here is ash. And if you feel the ash on it, I think I returned it when it was still a little bit damp. It was still a little bit wet. It hadn't quite reached its equilibrium point. And so you can actually feel the grain where it's kind of raised up in certain areas. As those cells have continued to dry, they shrink. And when they shrink, they create a little bit of a texture to it. Now, you could sand that out if you want to, but I kind of like the texture of it. And so that's why a lot of the green bowls that I turn, I will try to sand them right away and then let them sit so those cells can kind of scrunch up and you get a nice textured feel to it. Okay. All right. That's your science lesson. The 2 other pictures that are on here talk about how the distortion happens. I should probably mention that. There's longitudinal. So we think about a tree sitting vertically in the ground. I like to think of a tree as being just as straws. So think of a tree as just straws going straight up, the main trunk right there, and then as a limb branches out, the straws are starting to go that way. But if you think about them as a straw, then you can kind of imagine that there's holes in those straws right there where there's a lot of air, where it can suck up liquid, of course, if it's a straw. But the height never changes. But if you were to squeeze those straws, you can compress those straws down. And it's the same thing with a piece of wood. vertically or longitudinally, there's very little shrinkage that occurs as the wood dries. 0.01 or 0.1, no, yeah, 0.1%, pretty minimal. But the other direction, circumferential and radial, we have much greater change in how it shrinks. So I've got two diagrams, one of, just kind of a log like this. The circumferential is the outside, or the ring, shall we say, and then the radial is how much it compresses in. And then down here on the bottom, you can see kind of a good example of what happens here is that this would have come out of a flat section of log. I turned it flat, and then as it dries out, it starts to change shape, and it really does consistently change shape of what we have here, about 4% radially. And that's how much thickness from side to side it shrinks. And then circumferentially is how much around it shrinks in, kind of all the way around. Why is it important to know this, and why did I just spend a few minutes talking about it? How many people here have ever turned a piece of wood green and then seen it crack? Everyone should raise their hand if you've turned green wood, right? If you understand this, you can start to figure out how to prevent them from cracking in such a degree. And I went from losing, the first time I tried turning green wood, probably half of the bowls that I turned, to a rough out shape. And, 6 months later, they've all got cracks in them. To now, I rarely ever lose a bowl, maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20, because I've learned to kind of understand how the wood moves, and then how best to make a rough out for me, so that I don't lose that many bowls. Does that kind of make sense? What questions do you guys have on the technical side of turning green wood here? Mike?
What kind of wall thickness should you be so that when it dries, it burns it?
So on the back here, I've got some of my thoughts on turning green wood. This side I stole from books and other people that are smarter than me. This side are kind of my thoughts on green wood. But to answer that question, Mike, you usually want to keep the wall thickness about 10% of the diameter of the piece, of the rough out. So I think I brought a tape measure, but this is probably somewhere around 8 or 9 inches across. Let's round up and say 10 inches across. So if you're going to have a rough out that is 10 inches in diameter when you start, you want to keep the wall thickness about 1 inch. And that gives it enough room for it to morph and warp and change shape, so that when you put it back on the lathe later on, you can turn it down to a much slimmer wall thickness, but have it perfectly round. If I were to draw a circle in here, a perfectly round circle, it would be on the outside here. It would come across the inside, go back to out, come across here. I didn't really do this very well. So the circle would be, it kind of be closer in here and then further on the outside over here, because this side and this side have shrunk in. So we want to make sure we've got enough material on this wall thickness. So about 10%. So if you've got a bowl that's 15 inches in diameter, when it's roughed out, you want to leave about 1.5 inches or so. And depending on the wood, some woods will warp more than others. For instance, we don't have any here because we're not in the Pacific Northwest, but Pacific Madrone is notorious for warping pretty dramatically. And so you might need to, if you're going to turn a twice turn bowl, have a wider thickness than, say, some other woods that don't warp or don't change quite as much. Yeah.
So is there anything besides the thickness, like you were saying, in order to not have as many bowls crack? I'm just
Sure.
thinking make it thicker.
Well, if you make them thicker, so that's a good question. If you make them thicker, the reason why a bowl cracks is because the outside of the bowl loses moisture faster or than the inside. So you actually need to just control how slowly the rough out piece dries. And that's going to help equalize the moisture on the outside as well as the inside more slowly, so that you there isn't a dramatic change. If you have a dramatic change in moisture, that's where you're going to have it crack. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. Yeah. I do have a special box. Yeah, it's a Rubbermaid container. No, actually, I do use a Rubbermaid container. I use a lot of different ways, and one of them's right here. The plastic bag. It's real fancy. This one is from Sprouts. I prefer the Trader Joe's. They're a little bit deeper. But a paper bag helps create a microclimate for your piece. So if I were to rough out this bowl, and I'm going to rough out a bowl here in a minute, and then put it in this bag right here with a bunch of the shavings that I'm about to make, it creates a microclimate, as I like to call it, where the climate inside the bag is different from the outside. If we leave it out, the air outside right now is much drier, probably around 12% moisture content. And the bowl is at, let's say, 35, 40, somewhere around there. So when I put it in the bag with those shavings, I've now created a moisture climate that is similar to the bowl itself. So, and the paper is permeable, so it will slowly leach off the moisture versus aggressively releasing the moisture for you. So with some woods, you might want to double bag it. Chris. Yes. So if you notice right here on this rough out, and I can hand this guy around too, the edges on it, on top and bottom right here, they're rounded off. They're not sharp. And I'll demonstrate that when I turn something here. But if you have a sharp edge, the sharp edge is more likely to form a crack or begin a crack. Because I'm not sure the exact scientific reason why. I could make one up, but I'm not going to. Stress. That's a good reason. Some people have a lot of stress. Some wood has a lot of stress. But those sharp angles are going to create more stress on the corner right there and are more likely than a crack. So if you just round it over just a touch, it's a rough out. It doesn't matter what it looks like. You could even have torn grade on it. I'm not gonna judge. But that's going to prevent those edges from having a more likelihood of crack. Yeah.
Do you use like a probe moisture meter?
I do have a moisture meter. For the most part, I really only use it if I'm doing something specific where I think I need it. But for the most part, most of my rough outs end up sitting on the shelf for 2 or 3 years anyway. So it's only when maybe I have a piece that a client or someone needs sooner than I normally would, and I'm going to check the moisture on it regularly. I usually don't check with my moisture meter.
Well, if you don't do it, if you don't write down.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But I know that if that bowl sits on the shelf for about 2 years, it's probably going to be dry enough to turn. No problem. If I picked it up off the shelf 6 months later, I'd want to check. And if I was going to turn that, 6 months after I roughed it out, more than likely I would get some movement on the piece after I'm done with it too. But you can use a moisture meter. The problem with the moisture meter is that moisture meters generally will only check the moisture on the length of the pin that you use to actually push in there, unless you have one of those that you can put on it. But with most bowls, since they're curved, it's hard to put a flat surface of a moisture meter. So the pin version works a little bit better. Does everybody know what a moisture meter is or not? It's a device that measures the moisture between 2 points. And usually those 2 points are these 2 little pins that you stick into the wood. And it says, between there, we've got about this much moisture right here. It is really handy when drying slabs and things like that. But I don't use it too much. What I do is if I'm going to do a bowl like this where I'm going to go to a finished thickness on it and I'm going to put it in a plastic or a paper bag here to slow the drying down, I'm going to weigh it every couple of days on a postal stamp scale, and I'm going to see how much moisture it loses. Use grams for this because grams is a lot easier to count from 500 grams down to 200 grams or whatever it might be. If you use ounces, there's more math involved. So I prefer the gram setting there. But I'll watch it, and over a period of 1 or 2 weeks, something that's this thin like this will probably dry out in about a week or 2. But then I'll let it sit for another week or so to make sure that the weight has remained steady. So if you check it every day, you might go from 500 grams to 470 to 450 to 430 to 432 to 425 to 420, and then like hold steady at 420. And then you know that it's reached EMC, or that equilibrium point with moisture. Yeah.
There's a difference in like what you get in winter versus summer.
I do. So wood that's cut down in winter generally has less moisture than wood cut down in summer. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So if you cut down a tree in the middle of winter when it's dormant, it actually has less moisture in it, less water than during the summer, during the growing season or the spring when it's pulling up as much moisture as it can from the ground. So you will see less movement from a rough out that is turned from a log that was cut down in winter versus one that was cut down in spring or summer. So if you want a lot of movement, you get wood that's cut down over the summer, and you got to work it in the summer too. And you'll get a lot more movement than you will something that's cut down over the winter. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you date your rough-outs, or do you just say, yeah, it's been about a year, or do you have a rotation system, or what do you do?
I used to date my roughouts, and I should date my roughouts, but at this point, I kind of forget to do it most of the time.
That's good practice.
Yeah, that is a good practice, is to write down when you turned it. You know, even just the month and the date is usually best, because then you'll know, okay, this was turned last year, or oh, this was turned 3 years ago. We're good to go. Yeah. Yes.
Split, is it one, for 1 in 20, or 1 in 10, or how do you manage to pull it off that thin wall hole system did not split off?
So this was a branch that came out of right here. So it literally just popped right out. So there's no cracking on this, but it doesn't hold soup. So I never really sold it. But the way that I prevented this from cracking is that I took a paper bag, put it in the paper bag, and created that microclimate. And on the outside of some of these bags, you're actually going to see numbers on them that I've tracked how much moisture has lost from that piece based on the weight. So that's what I did with this, is that I might have even double bagged it if I felt it was really wet, to slow down that drying process. And then every couple of days, check the weight on it. And when you open the bag and take it out, the bag is going to be wet. So you can actually change the bag and put it in a different bag, or put it back in the same bag so you have a similar moisture climate. With oak, oak can be finicky. You don't want to put it in the microwave because this is going to crack. But Bradford pear, you can totally put in the microwave, and it generally doesn't crack from rapid drying. But that's a whole different topic right there. But oak wants to be dried more slowly because oak has a very porous, open grain. It allows for that, if we come back to our front chart here, that free moisture, which is kind of the moisture that's kind of in the straw, to evaporate very quickly. But it contains, or it holds that bound moisture just like any other wood does. So you have to slow down that initial dry period for oak so that it has a little bit more time to release the stress and move to that, start moving into its shape. Yeah. You can also boil wood. You can put wood in the microwave. You can put wood in, what are those beads called? The desiccant beads. There's all sorts of ways to dry. Yeah.
You ever like seal some of your
I don't seal a once turned bowl because sanding anchor seal off is a real pain, because I've done it. But I will seal a rough out, and ironically that's pear that has not been sealed, but most of the time I will seal it a rough out with either a PVA sealer or a wax emulsion sealer, which is Anchor Seal 2, I think is what's sold now. But a PVA sealer is basically Elmer's glue. Elmer's glue is a PVA glue. And that's what I prefer to use because it creates, for me, it's worked better than using Anchor Seal. But I also used Anchor Seal when I first started turning green wood, and that's when I had a bunch of failures. So it could be that they both work just fine. And the PVA was cheaper though, too. Yep. So you put the PVA on the end grain of the wood, or whatever sealer you're going to use. If you go to Craft Supplies, they call it their green wood sealer. It's Elmer's glue with an antifungal agent in it, so that it doesn't, or it helps cut down on some of the spots that'll show up. But the end grain is right here, and right here we have side grain here and here. So the idea is that you put your sealer on the end grain so that it is equalized or will lose moisture the same as your side grain. So if you don't cover your end grain, you're going to find end grain checking very quickly. Because the end grain loses moisture very quickly, the side grain contains it longer and therefore creates more resistance as it's trying to shift. You can also put it on the inside where the end grain is here as well. So on both the outside and the inside right here. And that's going to go ahead and help slow down to equalize that moisture loss. If you put it on the whole bowl, you can do that. You're essentially, coating the entire thing in a slowing agent. That's worked for me in the past, but every wood's a little different and everyone kind of has to figure out how they want to do it. But this is what's worked well for me. Yeah. Yeah. If you use green wood on a segmented bowl, you're going to have trouble because, first of all, you have to glue that segmented bowl together. So your moisture has to be below a certain point. Who here was at the tight bond talk last year? Tight bond? You remember how he talked about the surface of the wood has to be a certain moisture content because the glue is essentially adding that moisture and then it needs to evaporate off. I don't know if that just made sense, but that's the science in my head. If there's too much moisture on the wood, you can't apply a PVA glue because the PVA glue needs to release moisture in order to create its bond. So unless you're going to use a different kind of glue that can actually work with water, maybe a polyurethane glue, potentially. What's that? Gorilla Glue? Yeah, Gorilla Glue is polyurethane glue, which actually reacts with wood and helps it to cure. So essentially, you don't want to do that. Kevin's going to be the expert on segmented bowls, though, so I would talk to Kevin about that.
But the green wood was dry.
Yeah,
It's dry. Just about as dry as it can be.
sure.
The room out of that. And there's no problem combining segment with solid wood. I've done it.
All right, I got a box of wood here. Should we turn something? Yeah? Okay. So when you're turning green wood, because of all the moisture in there, we'll start with this one. Your material is much softer, okay? Which means when you need to grab it securely. I've drilled a little hole right here and I'm going to screw it onto my screw chuck. A screw chuck is a great way to hold green wood, but you need to be careful that you use the right size drill bit, the pilot hole, to go and screw onto the screw chuck right here. If you use the incorrect size, too big, then the wood's just going to spin on there and it's not going to work for you. Go.
Go like 1 or 2 drill index down.
A good question. Yeah, probably. So I usually, these screws here are around 5/8 of an inch. So I probably use a 5/16, probably. Yeah, somewhere around there. And really what I want to measure is the actual diameter of the screw itself, and go just slightly bigger than that. And because these threads are pretty deep on these screws right here, and that makes it easy to grab on. So I'm going to thread this guy on real quick just to get it started. And I don't let it thread all the way on. Some people do. But all I'm doing is putting pressure on it from here so it screws onto the chuck. Now, if I was doing a safety minute, I would probably say don't do that. But I'm showing you what I do. The other thing I am going to do, which is a safety thing, is I'm going to bring the tailstock up. Even though it's screwed on here, I'm still going to bring in the tailstock for as long as it's comfortable to use. And you can actually see right here, my center is just crunching right into that piece of material right there. I don't need to overdo it. I just want to make sure this doesn't go flying at the camera. It's not going to go flying at the camera. I hope not. Rob would be mad if it did. Now, when you work with green wood, we're going to step into our safety minute here. You want to check for cracks. Because any amount of time this wood has been sitting and having the opportunity to dry, if you're not controlling the drying, it's going to start to crack. So they've been in this black bag for a couple of days, so it doesn't have a lot of moisture loss to it. The bag is actually wet on the inside right now. So turning green wood, I'm going to use a face shield to start. And if you look at my face shield, you can see it's pretty beat up. The actual shield on here is about a year old. I replace it usually about once a year. I probably need to replace it. And the reason why it's broken or bent up is because all this material here is going to come off. And it's going to come off pretty quick. And chunks of bark, if they come off, they like to fly at your face. So use a face mask. That's number one. Yeah. Yeah, do you have a garbage can? What? You do want to look for nails. You want to look for cracks. You want to look for any metal or other foreign material, rocks. It's good to know where your wood comes from. This is an apple tree that came from my backyard that used to supply apples and now is not supplying apples. So we're removing it and going to put in a younger one. So I don't think there's anything in it, but we'll find out. I got a really nice piece of black walnut. Took the whole morning, went out with my father-in-law. We got a trailer full. I brought it back full of nails. So I spent multiple hours recovering that, and I've gotten, I think, one bowl out of it. Is a waste. So your mileage will vary, but the other thing I'm going to do here is when I start this lathe up, is I'm going to stand out of the way. This is our safety minute, by the way. Wear a face shield when working with green wood to get it started. Stand out of the way and turn left-handed. Who's left-handed here? If you're left-handed, this is going to be easy for you, hopefully. If you're not left-handed, you got to learn how to turn left-handed. Let me get set up here. There we go. What I mean by turn left-handed, in this case, is I'm actually going to stand kind of behind the piece, and I'm going to hold the tool in the opposite hand that I usually use here to start removing material. And it's going to fly over this way, but the main thing is that it's not going to fly at me. And so if there's anything that's going to come off, it usually comes off early and quickly. And so you don't want to be standing right in front of it when it's coming off. Somebody might know a little bit better. I'm pretty sure Mike Mahoney made, turning left-handed famous because he's left-handed. But I think a lot of the guys from Utah, they kind of were in that circle. They've all kind of done the same thing. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put our face shield on. I hope I don't hit anybody. I don't think I will. The other thing, oh, can you hear me with the mask on? Luke, I am your father. Is you don't want to bring the speed up too high initially. I'm only at about 500 RPMs, but because this is a little bit off balance, you can see it's shaking a little bit. I'm just going to lift this bearing. So it's all right that it's moving a little bit. And I really don't care what the finished surface looks like right now. I'm going to lower my tool rest a bit. But I can see already, when I cut this piece, this is one of the pieces where I actually have the pith on this side right here. The reason why I have this is to show when you're cutting up a log, you generally want to remove the pith or the center of the tree because this area is going to crack. This is kind of your central area right here. It's going to crack. Whatever you do, generally can't prevent it. So if you remove it, if you cut two pieces out of it on the side like this, there's no pith here, no pith here. Now it has the opportunity to do this little movement right here that this one has done, where this top half would fold this way and the bottom half would fold this way to create kind of a, I guess a wide V right there. But you're going to have less opportunity for cracking by removing the pith. This one actually has the pith in it. So I picked up the wrong one first. So we're going to show you how to treat that though too. So standing out of the way. Now, the fun thing about turning green wood is getting these nice big fun shavings to come off. Now, and this is a pretty small piece. I do have a 5/8 inch gouge just because this is what I use to rough most things out. The size of this, the diameter of this tool cuts down on vibration a lot, especially when working with, uneven pieces like this. So I like to use a 5/8 inch tool, even when I'm working with something a little small like this. And you want to stop and check. I've got a few little pieces coming off right here. But that all looks pretty good. Now, I want to get a flat bottom here. So I need to get a flat bottom here so I can create a tenon. And what we're going to do here. Now that I've gotten most of the bark off right here, there's much less chance it's going to come after me. So now I can go ahead and kind of resume my normal stance to come in here and clean up this bottom. I really want to brace my tool against my body and make sure I'm pushing down on my tool here. Now to get to this point right here, I've got this little nub right here. I still have a little bit of bark right here. I'm going to go ahead and move off my tailstock. That just falls right out. Check that I'm secure. I'm going to remove that. Now I'm just going to rough this out real quick. So I actually want to keep a little center point right here. So I'm going to bring my tail center back up. And again, I don't really need it to force it in there too deep. I just want it to hold it just in case something happens and this starts to go that way. This is going to hold it in place so it can't get away. But now I've got a flat bottom right here. Pretty sure I measured these calipers the right way the other day. That's close enough. When you're making a tenon for green wood, you want to make it larger than you would for dry wood for two reasons. One, the wood compresses. So as you put it in the chuck, even if you have a perfect tenon, it's still going to compress a little bit. And two, since we're going to do we're going to return this eventually later, we want to have enough material to work with later on, because this tenon is going to warp too. It's going to become an oval shape. When it becomes that oval shape, you need to make it round to put it back in the chuck. So you want to use a slightly larger tenon for the rough out than you do for the final bowl itself. I'm going to bring the speed up a little bit. There we go. So my tenon's about the right size. There's still a little bit of bark right here, which usually I would want to take off. There's so little of it that it should be okay. But what I do want to do is I'm seeing a crack right here. So I am going to need to remove about a half an inch, maybe almost 3/4 of an inch from the top here. Because if there's any crack when you start to dry a piece, then it's going to crack. So if you see a crack when you're putting any type of sealer on it, just know that crack is only going to get bigger. They don't get smaller and they don't go away. They don't self-heal. That's right. So I'm going to come from the front root gently here. And I'm going to turn away any of the material there that I see has a crack in it. I'm going to go just a little bit deeper and then we should be good there. when we turn it around, we'll remove the rest of that, but for right now, that's all we need to do. And if I'm just roughing out a bowl, I really don't need much shape to it. I just want a little bit. So let me make my tenon. You can use a spindle gouge to make your tenon. You can use a scraper, whatever you want to. If you're moving quickly and you have a lot, a scraper with the exact angle of your chuck jaw angle is very handy. I have one. I don't use it. I just end up using a spindle gouge because I prefer the spindle gouge. And again, we want to make sure that our edges are rounded. So the bottom edge right there for the tenon is actually already okay, but I've got a little bit of a an edge right here and a little bit of an edge right here. Now for my tenon, I do want to make sure I've got a nice good seal right there, but I can still remove or kind of just bump that off a little bit so that I have a rounded corner there. I'll take my spindle gouge to do that and just gently. That's it. All right, what time is it? Good, we can do another one. Oh yeah, with the screw chuck, it can be a little tough to get off sometimes.
Side of that? Or are you doing this for this demonstration?
I'm going to do the inside in a few minutes, but I'm set up with the screw chuck right now. So usually what I do if I'm roughing out pieces, I will rough out a handful of pieces that I'm going to work on that day. And then I'll do the outside first, and then I'll come back and do the inside because I got to turn everything around. Especially if I'm working on pieces that I want to be similar, that helps me keep that movement and flow. Usually by the end of working on, 5 or 6 or 7 of the same thing, they're all starting to really look alike and similar. And that comes in handy. Okay. So you're going to get hit with shavings in a few minutes, but not yet. If you can get your garbage can in the right spot, it really does help. I do want to make sure I turn my speed back down because it is a new piece of wood. I want to check to make sure I've got a space between my tool rest and my piece here. I got my visor on. Left-handed cut. Ooh, there we go. So one of the problems when you don't have something super round is that if you go a little bit too aggressively, it'll go ahead and get caught. This is end grain right here, and end grain is going to tear out real easy like that. So just be aware of that. And when it does happen, just take a break for a minute. Go get a cup of coffee. And take a smaller cut next time. Now, I'm not fully around here yet, but I'm just moving my tool rest in. There we go. Now we have some better RPMs. Even though I'm holding it more traditionally, I still have my head right over here, just in case. So what's fun about green wood is you can make a lot of shavings very quickly. You can get very messy very quickly, and make sure you have a brush handy when you walk into the house so your spouse doesn't ask you where you just came from or why you have walked in the house. Exactly. So on my lathe at home, there's a wall, and directly in line with that wall, there is a water stripe where moisture just shoots straight off. And also usually my shirt will be quite wet after working with really wet stuff too. I gotta shorten this piece up a bit to get the tenon on there. I want to make sure my piece is secure when I move that tailstock out of the way. Check the size of my tenon. Make sure you form your tenon. For a little piece like this, you don't need a very big tenon. Make sure you have that rounded edge right there. Sorry for the squeak. Oop.
Mark it, or did you just hold it up close?
I did mark it, yeah. You always want to, when you're using a caliper to mark, you only want to touch one end. You can see there's a little shaving on there. If you touch both, it's going to fly out. So you just stick one end out, mark it, and then I kind of line it up to see, and then I'll adjust it if need be. And because I'm working with a wider tenon right now, it's a little bit less detailed as far as what it needs to be, but it still needs to be as close as it can be.
Phil, if you put paraffin on the threads that come on.
Paraffin wax, it's a good idea. 'Cause this one's on there pretty good. There we go.
Or the ceiling, all the way around this leg. Right behind you got two. I thought, I don't know, I actually have turning wet wood. It's spray. All kinds of freeze out. So there's a shower putting around my wall. Thank you.
Well, it contains the chips too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In certain areas. Do that with our.
I use bed sheets, old bed sheets. A little more colorful. You can get some good shower curtains too. But those will work too. All right, so we're gonna turn these two around here real quick. I'm just gonna rough out one and then we'll play with another one real quick while we have time. What other questions do we have? Yes.
So, from a beginner standpoint,
Uh-huh.
the advice is driveway, living in, got a patient, on shelter here, right?
I would actually say to use green wood. If it's easy for you to get, and just turn a bunch of bowls, doesn't matter what they look like, and just throw them in the fire pit. It's really great practice material because it's soft. Yeah, and it's fast to do. So it's what? Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. Less friction. I'm not worried about dust right now. There can be a little bit of dust, especially if you have like punkier woods and things like that. But for the most part, what you do have to worry about is the bed, because a lot of these are cast iron. They're not stainless steel. So this one needs to be cleaned. But you want to keep some sort of lubricant or wax on there just to make sure that the water doesn't soak in. And you just want to clean the lathe bed off. This chuck is stainless steel, so I don't have to worry about it too much. But this one, the jaws are not stainless steel, so I have to clean these jaws pretty regularly. But for a beginner, I would say don't pay for wood if you don't need to. You know, if a large limb comes down in your neighbor's yard and you're handy with a chainsaw, make a ton of little bowls. And that's going to help you practice the actual technique of turning a bowl without having to invest. Exactly. You're welcome to turn wet wood, or I'm sorry, dry wood. Go for it. I try to avoid turning dry wood when I can. I much prefer to turn wet wood. Mhm.
And go ahead and let it do what it does, and see what happens. And if you turn it really thin, it's gonna dry fairly quick, so.
Yeah.
They have less movement than you let it bigger and let it dry quick.
We'll talk about that in a minute too. I'm just going to rough this one out, then we're going to turn this one thin over here. What? Oh yeah. Let's see. All right, ready? Coming at you. Same gouge, yeah. This has I think it's around 60-ish degrees on it right here. I actually don't use this gouge a lot. I really only use it to rough things out because I usually use something that has a 40-degree bevel angle on it. But then I've got to use something with a really steep bevel angle to get the bottom. But that's a different story. But to just rough something out right here, this is a small bowl. It really doesn't, I don't need too much thickness, but I do need to clean up this rim right here. I'm going to round off that edge on the inside. I'm going to take one more cut on the inside here. And this is where you can practice your cuts. If you're just roughing out material, but you want to be able to practice getting that bottom cut. And take your time with it, make nice shavings. It's much easier for me to practice on wet wood than it is on dry wood. So for a rough out, that's all I'm going to do. Ooh, we need to wax this guy a little bit. And right now I've left the base on this probably a little bit too heavy. I don't usually turn something this small. It's all I had available to me this weekend. But I want to leave my thickness here equal to my thickness at the bottom. And you need to include the tenon in that too, or have that kind of figured in a little bit so that, because if there's more material down here at the bottom and less on the top, the bottom's just going to crack, which will probably happen with this one right here. We shall see. Was that? Oh yeah, that's it. There you go. It is, yeah. Great for smoking. These shavings right here, if you anybody want to bag these up and take them home, go for it. Because those are really great to put in a smoker or put in a grill and get a nice little flavor to it. And if you look at the tenon on that bowl as it goes around, you'll probably see some compression lines. That's where the jaws really grabbed onto it there. Oh. I was going to change chucks here. There we go. So when I work on thin bowls, I like to use long jaws, these shark jaws, so that I can work on the bottom of the piece while it's still on the chuck.
Can you elaborate on what you just said a little better?
Sure. So these jaws right here will put the edge of my chuck much further away from the piece. So if I put it in here, I can't really get down to the bottom right here with these jaws. But on this guy, I can get all the way to the bottom right here and have space to work. Okay, so we got a little bit of material to remove here. If I was really going to rough this out, I would care more about the cracks here. We'll make something. Okay, I'm going to switch over to my other gouge that I usually use. So this has a steeper bevel angle. It's more around 45 degrees or so. And when I work on a once turn bowl, I'm going to move to this gouge because it's a little more comfortable for me versus this gouge, which has kind of the blunter end to it. Now, sorry if I'm announced, I'm going downhill right now. I'll take that off. I've got all the dangerous stuff off here, so I'm going to take my face shield off, but my glasses here are impact protected glasses. What I'm going to try to do here is just make kind of a thin wall vessel here. And hopefully, so are you supposed to use your gouge uphill or downhill? Uphill, right? So if I'm cutting down this way to get to this base down here, I'm actually cutting downhill. And if we're thinking about straws, in this case, I've got a side grain piece, so my straws are running this way. If I'm going down this way, it's going to be pushing those straws out and potentially creating tear out. With a sharp tool, you can kind of prevent that, but we got a few little things going on here. So to go the right way, if I take a scraper, hopefully you can see this. With a scraper, I can actually pull the correct direction to cut those fibers. Well, I actually think that looks worse than when I cut it the wrong way. So I'm just going to cut it the wrong way. You got to do what works. If something shouldn't work, but it works for you, go ahead and do it. With caution on that, make sure you're being safe. But if something doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, try something different and see if maybe there's a different way that's going to work better for you. So I just want to get a nice clean finish down here. If I take my cut nice and slow, then I can cut downhill and still have a good finish. Yeah, that works real nice. Okay. Yes, you always want to try to cut with supported fibers. That's the theory behind making a clean cut, and generally that's what works. In this case, I was going the opposite direction. I was cutting down those fibers, which shouldn't work, but you have to listen to the wood and make sure. If you feel it bouncing and vibrating, you'll know that there's something else going on right there. But that worked okay for me right there. All right, I'm just going to hollow this out. Boop. So now I'm going to go to a 1/2-inch tool so I can do more of a finishing cut to try and get a nice thin wall right here. I got to clean up, I got to catch, I got to clean up the rim a little bit there. There we go. And when you're working with thin, you want to stop and check on a regular basis so you don't go through the sidewall. The other thing you want to do is if you've roughed something out one way and then you put it back in the chuck, you want to check the outside of the piece to make sure it's actually round still. It hasn't gotten a little bit off. I'm not going to say the spindle on this is off, but it was a little off. So you want to make sure that you have a nice round piece on the outside before you start the inside, because if you don't, you might say, oh yeah, I've got plenty of room right there. And then you actually don't have room on the other side and you go through the other side. Oops is right. When working with green wood, once I do a section here, I don't ever want to go back, because by this time, with how thin this is already starting to dry. It's already going to start to move. By the time I get to the bottom, that rim is going to be totally out of alignment. So I want to get it all finished up. Don't put your hands in a moving object. Man, I'm going to have a lot to talk about next month. Oh, you can't hear it with apple, but you can hear it with oak. You can actually hear the moisture start to evaporate and feel or hear these little like cracks going on. Yeah, yeah. And usually your fingers are your best gauge for something thin. If I had a light, I could shine a light through and I'd probably see some of the light differences as well. Now, one of the problems that I run into here, because I have a semi-enclosed form with this angle of gouge, is that when I bring it around, suddenly my gouge runs into the sidewall right here. So I have to switch tools. I think this has around more of a 60-ish or 55. So it doesn't, I like the 40-degree or 45-degree because I think it cuts better for me. It makes a nice slicing cut. The blunter edge on a 60-degree, I don't think it cuts as well, but that's my personal preference. Someone will disagree with me. Many people will. But it will let me get to the bottom of this bowl without touching the rim. Okay, let's make sure my tool rest doesn't break my piece here. There we go. Okay, good. So back to your question about would you turn green wood if you're new? Absolutely, because this is a lot of fun. In fact, when I turn dry wood now, I'm like, man, either my tools aren't sharp or I'm doing something wrong because I can't do what I can with wet wood. Okay. Now I just got to get it off. And I hope I don't go through the bottom. Any last questions on turning green wood? To get this off, probably going to part it off here in a second, but I need a very small gouge to get in here. Let's make sure I don't go through the bottom. Absolutely. You can take it off and put it against some kind of a plate. Okay, famous last words. One more cut. You can listen to the wood If you hear the pitch change, you hear a big change, you'll know you could be getting into the danger zone. It's never just one more cut, right?
What was your least favorite smelling green wood?
Pin oak.
Or elm? Or willow?
I'm not a fan of elm either. I'm just not a fan of elm in general, but pin oak is bad. Let's bring the RPMs down just a little bit here. So now we're under 1,000 RPMs. And I didn't even talk about sanding. And I didn't bring my saw. I don't know how I'm going to get this off. There we go. So usually I would have already sanded this while it was wet. And the reason why I sand it while it's wet is so that as it shrinks and dries, I can get that texture that I like. If I've made clean cuts on it and I'm happy with the cuts that I've made and I have no major issues with it, I can probably get away with not sanding it now, wait for it to dry, and then buff it out to get a nice smooth surface. But I already got it off. Thank you, though. That would have been handy, a nice little. Yeah, I'm out of time. What other questions do people have on green wood? You're welcome to ask me later on. Yes. That one's a lot smaller. That would probably take about 6 or 8 months. Yeah. And the way that I usually work now, if I get a lot of wood, I'll probably rough turn it to its general shape. And then I won't even wait for it to dry. I'll put it back on and start turning it again because I like the warp that occurs. But it allows me to get it turned thin and get through it so that I can use more wood and less wood cracks on me. If I leave it in this form for any length of time, you're going to develop cracks. It's just going to happen. So if I could rough turn it and then even a month or two later come back and turn it again, then I've got a little more to work with. Yeah. All right.
Thank you.